All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Apologies for the late start. I know everyone has a busy schedule. So let's get started. The September 10th, 2024 work session of the Anne Arundel County Council is called to order. Please silence all electronic devices at this time. We're here to discuss a whole host of legislation. Ms. Rodbin, I believe your bill is first, bill number 67-24, and you have the floor.
Thank you. So as you can see on the agenda, I do plan on withdrawing this bill, but I do want to continue to look at the subject matter. And so I really felt that based on some of the feedback, the purposes for this bill, which are multiple, are not clear. And so I thought this would be a really great opportunity to understand why this is even a topic of conversation. So you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is a graphic that sums up probably the biggest motivator for this bill is global warming. And I just want to describe, because I actually think this is a really cool graphic, but each of the vertical stripes on this image represents the average temperature for any given year in Anne Arundel County, going all the way back to 1895 when we had recorded, recorded temperatures. And you can see the trend. And it's actually more clear, if you could go to the next slide. If you look at the last 60. So basically a red vertical stripe means that the temperature was above the average temperature over the last 127 years, if we're going back to 1895, and this goes up to 2023. We don't have a average year for 2024 yet. But you can see that, we are trending warmer. That darkest red stripe, I don't know if anyone remembers, that was 2012, where we had several consecutive weeks over 100 degrees. And that is, that was our hottest on record at the time, but we are getting closer and we're breaking records in different areas of climate change, in different aspects of climate change in the United States, all over the country, in our state. In flooding in Annapolis has, increased. 2 of the top 10 floods in the city of Annapolis have happened this calendar year. And one of the, I think, top 5 happened just in the last 2 years. So we are entering new territory in terms of global warming and climate change. Next slide. Okay, so the 3 main drivers for this legislation are the nuisance in the neighborhoods. Believe it or not, I got a lot of emails saying, why is this even a concern? People can't just deal with it. Well, a lot of people are really frustrated that it becomes such an ongoing thing in their neighborhood, that they're constantly listening, especially in the fall, to very loud gas-powered leaf blowers. We know that there are significant health impacts of gas-powered leaf blowers, especially to the operators of them. And then I'm going to talk about the environmental harms, which is really, for me, the biggest piece of why this is a piece of legislation worth bringing. And we're talking about greenhouse gases, volatile organic compounds, and ozone. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to go through those 3 in order. And the neighborhood nuisance is at a distance of 50 feet. You're talking about 75 to 80 decibels for a gas powered. So this is, and if you're the one holding the device, you're at 95, which is 95 decibels, which is enough to cause hearing loss after a relatively short period of time. Most operators do indeed use hearing protection, but if you happen to be the one that's nearby, even if you're not right up next to it, you probably don't have hearing protection with you all the time, just to, walking down the street and someone's using their gas-powered leaf blower. Electric blowers operate at 65 to 75. It may not sound like that big of a difference, but the way the decibel scale works is every increase in 10 on the decibel scale is actually 10 times louder. So a 65 decibel would be, let's go 75. So a 75 decibel device would be 10 times louder than a 65 decibel device. So it's not sort of incremental in the way we think of most ordinary scales. People like to be able to sit outdoors quietly and hear the birds chirp in their neighborhoods, hear the rustling of the trees, maybe hear the sound of kids playing, people splashing in a swimming pool. And can make even ordinary conversations outside difficult. More people are working from home and, using their homes as their home office. And so this is, something you're in the middle of a phone call and all of a sudden you can't hear because something very loud is going on in your neighborhood. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are the human health impacts that are raised by gas-powered leaf blowers. So we talked about hearing loss, but there's actually stress-related health issues that have been recognized by the American Lung Association and the American Heart Association. That constant, and these are for the operators mainly. Bystanders if you're, in sort of regular contact, but mainly for the operators, that having, a loud sound with deep vibrations for an extended period of time increases your blood pressure, increases your odds of cardiac disease, increases insomnia. Disequilibrium means it can create balance. You can develop issues with balance and mental health disorders, which to me seems very understandable. I can't stand being in, a space that's, got very loud sounds going on it for more than about 20 minutes. I can imagine how difficult that would be if that were your job every single day. Next slide. Then we've got the emissions that come from the emissions and other materials that are a danger to human health. So carbon monoxide, we all know what that does. Obviously you can kill you if you have too much exposure. It's not in that zone, but it still can impact the full function of your lungs. Nitrogen oxides, the same, which are also emitted from gas-powered leaf blowers. Small particulate matter, that basically means, any tiny, fragments of matter that are picked up and blown around by the leaf blowers can end up in your lungs, end up in your system in one way or another. We're talking everything from tiny bits of leaf, tiny bits of dirt, tiny bits of dog matter, feces, all can end up in your system and have negative health impacts, especially on respiratory function more broadly. Next slide, please. So as I said before, the environmental harm is where these are really, really bad news. Gas-powered leaf blowers are incredibly inefficient. So I actually had to read this statistic that I put on here several times and look it up in several places to make sure that I was actually reading it correctly, because I thought surely this must be backwards. It must be that, and I think I shared it with a number of people backwards, but only 30 to 40% of the fuel in a gas-powered leaf blower, which includes gasoline and oil. It's a mixture, mostly gasoline and a small fraction of oil, but only 30 to 40% of what is put in a gas-powered leaf blower is actually combusted or burned. The remaining 60 to 70% is spewed directly into the environment. And that's why these are very high emissions devices. The EPA has put down pretty strict emission standards for automobiles, trucks, basically anything that we use in the area of transportation have to meet those very high emission standards. There are emission standards for gas-powered leaf blowers, but they're they meet a very, very low threshold. The last update to those emission standards was 2007, and those were minor updates. The previous to those were in the year 2000. So we're looking at standards that are, 2007, 17 years ago. They're pretty old, and they're not not at all in terms of what is available in terms of best technology for the health of the planet, the health of the humans operating these devices. Next slide. Okay, so this is a particular comparison that has been made famous by a study by Edmunds, and you probably know Edmunds is one of the companies that reviews automobiles and trucks. And they had done a study looking, and this is from 2011, so this is not 100% current, but if anything, I would say if we were to repeat this, we would almost expect worst outcomes from this data. So if you're looking at the emissions of 30 minutes of use of a gas-powered leaf blower compared to a 2011, that's when they did the study, Ford F-150 SVT Raptor, which is one of their big pickup trucks, you actually, and we're talking about, there's a couple different kinds of emissions that come from leaf blowers. They're the ones that put them in categories. There are the ones that are directly greenhouse gases, like carbon dioxide and methane. Those are some of the biggest drivers of climate change. But there are others that are secondary. And so this is a comparison of the secondary emissions. And the secondary emissions basically help facilitate the creation of more of the primary drivers. So we're talking about, actually, we'll talk about it on the next slide. It's 128 times more from the gas-powered leaf blower. 128 times more from a half-an-hour use of a gas-powered leaf blower to the Ford F-150 truck. And I almost had to, like, am I reading that correct? It has to be the other way around. It is not the other way around. The gas-powered leaf blower is that much worse. It's a two-stroke style engine, which all by itself brings down the efficiency compared to a four-stroke engine. And so you just, the lack of efficiency, the amount of fuel that's wasted, and then when we're talking about the secondary drivers of climate change gases are just, are very high when we're looking at leaf blowers. So I actually put all 128 trucks over the next couple slides. So you can go to the next slide. I just, was trying to drive my point home. There's more trucks and, okay, we got through the trucks. Okay, so we talked about a couple different of the, and by the way, that truck, in order to create the same amount of secondary emissions that come from a gas-powered leaf blower, would have to drive the distance from basically the Dallas-Fort Worth area to Anchorage, Alaska, to match 30 minutes of the gas-powered leaf blower in terms of the secondary emissions. Okay, so here are the things that you get from a gas-powered leaf blower. You get the major ones. I'm saying that, sort of tongue-in-cheek. We get more carbon dioxide. We get more methane. And those are mainly from the incomplete combustion and the inefficiency of gas-powered devices. Nitrous oxide is another greenhouse gas that also is emitted from gas-powered leaf blowers. There are other categories of nitrogen oxides that are, so we've got N2O, then there's NO2, NO3, different types of nitrogen oxides that some of are also greenhouse gases, and then some are sort of those secondary drivers of greenhouse gases that sort of facilitate the creation of more in the environment. All of those come from gas-powered leaf blowers. Next slide. And then we have the volatile organic compounds. These are in the secondary category, but they contribute to ground level ozone, which is a greenhouse gas. So we're creating a new ground level ozone layer in part because of our use of these. They also contribute to other environmental harms like smog, which obviously is not good for human health. And the ground level ozone and other volatile organic compounds actually damage vegetation. They're harmful to vegetation. They're damaging to soil and water quality. And I would believe that those are all important things that we care about, especially in Anne Arundel County. The health of our wildlife, the health of our water, the health of our soil are all critical components to maintaining the health of our environment. Some examples of what falls into the category of the VOCs are benzene, which is a known carcinogen, and that's one that comes out of that comes from gas-powered leaf blowers, and a whole bunch of others. Some maybe we're familiar with, some we're not as familiar with. Formaldehyde, obviously not something you want to be breathing in. Methanol, not something you want to be breathing into your lungs, and can have impact on the healthy function of your lungs. Next slide. Okay, so here's the cost-benefit analysis. So there are obviously so many different scenarios that come into play here when you're talking about, the cost benefit. You've got the upfront costs, you've got the costs of maintenance, you've got the costs of actually providing the power, purchasing the gas and the oil versus purchasing the electricity that you're going to use to, either if you're going to use a plug-in device instead or a battery-powered device. There's lots of different calculations, but the bottom line is no matter what, you're going to end up with cheaper operating costs with electric power. And, there's been multiple analyses that do this. And I've actually been in communication with, Montgomery County has passed a law like this several years ago. And so they have a lot more experience with electric lawn equipment. And so there's actually a young man who's developed, well, actually all the landscaping businesses there are electric now, the ones that operate in Anne Arundel County because they're required to by law, at least in terms of leaf blowers. Washington, D.C. went a step further and eliminated all gas-powered lawn equipment. And they're finding out that it's actually possible and that it's not causing massive increases to their costs. And so I hope at some point in the near future to bring out one of the actual landscape companies. There's one that I've had, direct communication with. They're very small. It's a one-man operation. I think he maybe has a couple employees. Some of the bigger operations, they've got a little bit more elbow room in terms of, making the upfront costs, footing the upfront costs. But in terms of the maintenance, if you're using electric, no gas or oil, no spark plugs, no air filters, no fuel filters. And the cost of electricity is so much cheaper than the cost of gas. That's where the big saving comes in. And the climate impact is so much better because Maryland, when we're talking about Maryland, our power is more than 50% non-carbon, non-greenhouse emitting sources. So we've got the biggest piece of that non-greenhouse gas creating is nuclear. And I know that that's a controversy, there's controversy surrounding nuclear, but there is, one of the huge benefits of nuclear power is it does not contribute to climate change. And then we've got, a small but growing percentage of power generated from wind and solar. So just by switching your fuel, you're reducing your greenhouse gas. Plus, you use so much less power in the grand scheme of things to power an electric device. Next slide, please. Okay, so folks that also have concern about lithium-ion batteries and say, hey, aren't they a fire hazard? Yes, they have been a fire hazard, but the manufacturers are making headway all the time in terms of increasing their fire safety. I will just point out to a very personal example. I'm an owner of a Chevy Bolt, which is a fully electric car. I have a 2023 model. The 2022 model had to be recalled. And all the batteries replaced with the battery that basically is the one that is now used in the 2023 model because they figured out ways to make the fire risk significantly lower. Folks have talked about, well, don't we have to go out there and mine all that lithium? Yes, we do. But a couple things. Lithium is becoming very highly recyclable. We have firms that are achieving over 90% recyclability of lithium in lithium-ion batteries. And we don't think of gasoline so much as mining because we usually think of mining as, solid substances, but gasoline is still mined. And, if you're running out there, and we're pumping oil and gas out of the ground, that is mining. So one time for a battery, continuous mining for gas-powered devices. Next slide. I think I'm almost to the end. Strain on power grid. Some folks have said, hey, shouldn't we worry about the strain on power grid if everything goes electric? Well, first off, the impact of these are so small in the grand scheme. Yes, I think we probably need to be looking at the impact if everyone starts getting an electric car. We need to be looking at how that will impact the power grid. But the, batteries from, electric devices. I mean, we're already there. I bet everyone has a electric powered device that they charge at home. And it's usually, you're most often charging it at night when you're not on the peak hours. The real concern in terms of electric grid is heating and air conditioning and data centers. Data centers are one of the biggest uses of electric power that we need to be concerned about how they're impacting the grid. Next slide. This is not really relevant because I'm withdrawing this bill, but I will make sure that this is true. There was a lot of confusion that this bill somehow created a criminal offense and people could go to jail. Absolutely 100% not true. The part of our code that lays out civil citations is in the same part of our code that lays out, criminal penalties. This bill does not create a criminal offense. It is a Class E civil fine, which is the lowest level civil offense. There's never prison time involved. Even you'd have to be a multiple time offender even to get to, a $500, which is the highest on the scale for a Class E civil offense is $500 fine. The first offense is $50. And certainly I think, I don't think I actually didn't put hey, the person can get a warning the first time, but I think that would be a reasonable addition because I understand communicating the details about, about a bill like this sometimes takes a little time. The county government doesn't have a big communication arm the way, we would love to be able to put commercials on TV and tell people everything that's going on so people can stay fully informed, but we don't have the budget for that, and the council certainly doesn't. Going on. Thank you. Another thing that was confusing, and this would absolutely stay true, is that the county government would absolutely be required. In fact, that's probably where I'm going to go first in the next piece of legislation, is asking the county and AACPS to comply with the requirements of this law to help be the leaders in terms of making the switch to electric lawn equipment. So this was never, the county government was not exempt. The way bills are written sometimes are confusing, and so it may have appeared that way. But when you put the bill language with the actual code, county government not exempt. And so these are some of the things that I'm looking at in future legislation. A transition period. I followed the model of the city of Annapolis, which has a bill that takes effect, basically banning gas-powered leaf blowers December 30th of this calendar year. And so I used a lot of the model that they did. But I am hearing feedback that a transition period would be very helpful, and I can certainly respect and understand that because, it's not without cost to upgrade, especially for the businesses that are not buying, the Home Depot versions that we can use at home. They need the commercial grade that are a lot more expensive. They need the commercial grade. They need multiples of the commercial grade. So more time to make the change. I would love to bring in the consultant that I've been in contact with in Montgomery County, who has a 100% electric. His whole business model is electric lawn service. So to just say, look, it's being done. How is it being done? Help us. What equipment do you recommend? What are some options? How can this happen? A transition fund, because this is something that everyone is going to benefit from. So I think it's fair to say, taxpayers should have a little skin in the game. I'm not thinking, a massive transition fund, but even if we, sort of imagined 50 cents from every resident of Anne Arundel County, we were about 600,000 people. That would be a $300,000 fund that would improve air quality, quality of life, and health outcomes for everyone in the county, especially the folks in these businesses. Clarification, the original bill only applied to backpack or things that were carried type leaf blowers. And I already mentioned the county government and schools are not exempt. You can go on. Thank you. And just final thoughts. This bill has gotten a lot of feedback. I've gotten I've gotten a range of messages, and I know my colleagues have too. I got a lot of people that were thrilled to see this. Probably the folks most thrilled to see it are the ones that really just don't like the sound and feel like it's a constant disruption in their neighborhood. But I also got feedback from a lot of folks that are really pleased to see that we're taking action on climate change. I also got feedback from folks that, said, oh, this is just trying to, appease a bunch of Karens, who don't like, which first I can't stand. My childhood babysitter was named Karen. She was like the best. So I've never liked calling people Karens, but I got that in emails. And I know some lovely Karens. Anyway, I got that particular comment though, like using the word Karen. That's why I bring that up. But, our job on the county council is not just to do the things that are easy and not to do the things that are, that are popular. We have to tackle hard things, and climate change is real. I direct your eyes back up to the top of this where I put it on the slide so you can see that this is really what this is about. We have people in different parts of the county who are, have experienced multiple floods in their homes. Obviously, I'm probably most familiar with downtown Annapolis, where we've had businesses that have had to spend tens of thousands of dollars multiple times a year recovering from, from record floods, which aren't, are becoming more common and not really record-breaking anymore because we're getting so, we're experiencing them so frequently. But, you can see, and I think about this, as probably everyone here knows, I'm a school teacher, and so I always think about this from the perspective of a young person. For me, I'm hoping to have another 20, 30 years, 40, let's go with 40, I like that, 40, 50 years on this planet. But young people are looking at their whole lifetime ahead of them, and they're looking at where this trend is going. And it's understandably terrifying. And so, to sit back and say, we can't do anything, or this is so small, it's not going to make an impact, I think is a really pitiful excuse for governing. We have to be proactive. We see the problems that are out there. We can solve them. I was really thrilled last week. I gave a presentation to folks at the Chamber of Commerce. And, I came in there, I was ready to, have people pointing their pitchforks at me and coming at me with torches and whatnot. The most receptive group to, working to make better legislation were landscapers and landscaping business owners, because they know all of this. They work with this equipment. They're the ones that, listen to the high volume and have to hear the, have to wear the head ear protection. So I think this is never going to be popular. Well, there's some people, for a small percentage of people, it'll be popular, but we can't just limit ourselves to doing things that are popular. We have to do things that are going to solve problems. This is a problem. 4 to 5% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the United States comes from gas-powered lawn equipment. You can say 4 or 5% is nothing, but 4 or 5% is not nothing. And so I'm looking forward to hopefully tackling this in the future with my colleagues, and looking to have a broader conversation to get to a place where we can move forward and make things happen. So with that, I really tried to go fast. I hope I'm under 20 minutes. So thank you guys, and I'm happy to take any questions. I guess I officially request to withdraw Bill 6724 in hopes of bringing forward future legislation to address some of the concerns that we see in the community because of gas-powered leaf blowers.
Noted, thank you.
And happy to take questions.
Thank you, Ms. Rodvian. Are there questions for our colleague at this time? Okay, it's been quite a morning with late traffic and whatnot. So we'll just move ahead to bill number 68-24. I believe these are administration bills, and we have a panel. Do we want to just take the time to talk about both 68 and 69 at the same time, right? Your panel's going to stay the same?
It is. Okay. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the council. Ethan Hunt for the administration. With me for both Bill 6824 and 6924, I have Aaron Karpowitz and Kathy Ebner from Arundel Community Development Services, Brian Schenk from the Office of Finance, and Kelly Kenny from the Office of Law. I'll start with Bill 6824, which is an amendment to the pilot for College Parkway Place. College Parkway Place is a 170-unit affordable housing community serving both families and older adults in Arnold. Property has had an existing pilot since 2004. You'll recall that back in the spring, the council updated the pilot to extend it for an additional 40 years and change the ownership name because the property is being refinanced to undergo comprehensive rehabilitation. The property is still under the same ownership. However, when you use tax credit financing, new subsidiary of the ownership entity will become the owner of the property at the time of closing. The pilot agreement was executed prior to the anticipated closing. However, there were some subsequent delays from the investor to meet the FY 2024 closing date, and so the project did not close during FY 2024 and therefore did not yet revert to the new ownership. So this left the project in a bit of limbo where the old pilot agreement was no longer effective, but the new pilot could not be applied either. So even though the property was still operating as an affordable housing development. So this amendment will allow the pilot to be applied retroactively to the taxes that were due for fiscal year 2025. The current pilot is in the amount of $83,809, and we would like that applied to their fiscal year 2025 taxes, which were already paid once the new ownership goes into place. The full tax amount is $215,280, and this amendment would allow this to happen and allow for the pilot to continue on the property as originally intended. We're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that summary. So what happens if we get to June 30th of 2025 and the acquisition hasn't taken place?
So, and I'm kind of looking to Kelly, but then it would not, they would not get that rebate on their taxes. So they would pay the full, they've already paid the full tax amount. So if for some reason that didn't take place during this fiscal year, then they just wouldn't, this wouldn't go into effect.
Is it possible that we could see on the council meeting before June 30th that we would see another bill extending it once more?
I don't think so. It's actually really, truly, I think, scheduled for next week. And so it is set to go forward.
Okay, thank you.
But your question is well understood because these deals, they keep getting pushed.
I don't have any questions about this specifically, but I didn't know if we wanted to take an opportunity during the conversation of both of these bills to talk a little bit with Kathy here, Ms. Ebner and Aaron Karpowitz, about the complicated deals at these affordable housing units. I'm not sure every one of us even understood exactly what was just said, but I know from experience in working in all of this space that these deals are very complicated, and it's not just here in Anne Arundel County, it's happening nationwide. Gap financing is one of the things that's being used across the country with housing trust funds and things. It's a huge problem to keep, not only build and new affordable units, but also maintain. We have a huge problem with preservation, and I believe both of these are about preserving affordability. So I don't know, Kathy, during this time or the next pilot, if you have anything you want to impart, any knowledge in layman's terms that the council can absorb and try to better understand.
Well, I'm happy to comment on that and actually appreciate the opportunity to do so. And you are so right, Councilwoman Pickford, that these projects are very, very complicated and very difficult, very cumbersome, really due to a variety of factors. I mean, the recent rise up of the interest rates has really put a lot of pressure on trying to, pencil the projects out. Construction pricing continues to climb. COVID, during the period of COVID, that really shot up, and they really haven't seen a decrease or a leveling out of the construction prices. The tax credit equity market is jittery. The investors are really demanding a certain yield on the tax credit investment, And, on top of that, operating expenses are, continue to be very, very difficult for these projects. They have limited rent revenue because of the restrictions on the rent, so the rents are low, yet their operating expenses, just like everyone else's in multifamily operating expenses, are seeing increases, especially in chief among them, the insurance. That's like a big fixed expense, and pressure on wage increases. Trying to keep the property staffed really demands good wages be paid, and that's just putting a lot of pressure on the operating expenses and the ultimate net operating income, which really does to the finance. And to your point on the preservation, that's what makes these projects, trying to maintain them, is having enough rent revenue to be able to put capital money back in to keep it maintained. On top of all that, the State Housing Agency has a chock full pipeline. There's a huge demand, obviously, for affordable housing, and they've got a big pipeline of projects they're trying to close, and they've got limited resources themselves. So all that combined, both of these developers are facing, delays and financial constraints. They're not alone. Everyone in Arundel County, state of Maryland, across the country are really facing the same situation. So, any type of resource that can be provided to them is most welcome.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions about 6824?
I just have a quick follow-up question.
Sure.
Just thought of this as you were going over those points, so thank you for sharing that. I don't know that I've seen a retroactive tax credit bill. I very well could have, and I'm just not recalling that. How does that work from the county side? How would you all process that, just for the record, to understand how that would work?
Brian Shank, Tax Utility Department, Office of Finance. Essentially, once this bill were to pass, I'd have to reach out to the State Department of Assessments and Taxation just to advise them. What they would do is they'd send over a decrease to change the county component, and then we would program in the pilot amount on the bill. So you're looking at a few moments of work just to adjust the tax bill to make sure it reflects the reality of this legislation.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other questions about 6824. Would you guys want to move ahead to 69?
Certainly. So Bill 6924 is an amendment for the pilot for the Villages at Marley Station, which is a 757-unit affordable housing community in Glen Burnie. Property has an existing pilot subsidy. However, the affordability period on the existing financing was set to run out in 2026. The property has been purchased by Fairfield, which is an affordable housing developer, and they plan to refinance the project, make renovations, and keep the property affordable for another 40 years. So in anticipation of closing, the county updated the pilot agreement in 2022 to reflect the new ownership entity and continue the pilot at previous levels. Since that time, there were major delays in finding a tax credit investor for the project. And this is a historically large tax credit deal valued at $120 million. So the delays caused the project costs to balloon, and due to escalating interest rates, increased construction costs, and carrying costs, which leaves a gap of approximately $48 million. The developer and owner is filling a large portion of that gap by bringing additional equity to the table and deferring 100% of its developer fee. And the state of Maryland is also coming up with an additional soft loan funding, and the county is recommending an increased pilot amount to help bridge some of that shortfall. So the amendment would reduce the pilot payment from $218,120 to $50,000. The proposed pilot amendment will reduce the pilot payment and allow the developer to borrow more tax-exempt bond funding. The amendment also makes a technical change that aligns the property with Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, their new income averaging policy, which allows for income averaging of the units so that they all average 60% of AMI, area median income, with some being under that and a few being over that, up to 80% AMI. It also allows the developer to receive a partial pilot if any of the units over 80% AMI are over 80% AMI, so that we do not have to displace any existing tenants. This amendment, along with the other financing that is coming from other sources to close the gap, will allow this 757-unit property to be preserved before it goes to market rate in 2026. Okay. Happy to answer any questions.
I don't see any questions, but I do want to, this is in my district. This is a huge, huge chunk of our affordable units in the county. I've toured, I've met with Fairfield. It's been a long, long process, and there are lots and lots of people that have come to the table to help preserve these units. I know it's a priority for the administration. It is certainly a priority for me. Not only are we preserving units, but it's my understanding the totality of these units will become affordable, which is an increase then, which is exciting. It is an older property. I think it was built in the 70s, 95?
No, I mean, right, the 70s, yeah.
95 was a long time ago too, but. Okay. So it is something this is a policy choice to preserve these units. I look forward to an affirmative vote from my colleagues if no one has any other questions. But I know we've worked with Secretary Day and his team and everyone in between to get this deal done, and it's been a labor of love. So thank you for all of your efforts, and I don't see any questions, so we can move on. But thank you for waiting and patiently for the late council start. We'll move on to Bill 70-24. Mr. Volkey, this is your bill.
It is. Thank you, Madam Chair. Don't live in your RV on a county road. Okay, that's what this bill is about. Literally, that's it. So, Mr. Hunt, if you and anyone from police would like to weigh in, please feel free to do so, but that's what the bill does.
Mr. Hunt?
Thank you. That was a very good summary. I appreciate Councilman working with us and with the police department to hash out some of the details. So I do have Captain Tim Schultz and Chris Murray from the police department who can talk about this in more detail if the council has any questions, but I think it's a pretty straightforward bill.
I do, oh, Ms. Summer, go ahead.
Is this a real problem in the county? I mean, or are we seeing this more often now?
So we anticipated that to be one of the questions. Good morning, and Captain Tim Schultz here from our Special Operations Division. We anticipated that to be one of the questions. It is an issue that we do get calls for service for, and one of the reasons the bill was, or the ordinance was crafted the way that it is the hours that it's captured in between the evening hours is because we do respond to calls for service where other people are overnighting in vehicles, and it's a public safety type of an issue, and that's really what we wanted to address here is the safety aspect of it. So in neighborhoods, it's just something that if an officer does respond to a call for service, we want to address that appropriately, and that's why it was also recommended that it be a civil violation.
What is the current code regarding residing in an RV in the county, whether on a public road or
So
otherwise?
I think that was another issue is that we needed to address that. And when the issue was brought up, there's traffic safety articles and there's traffic articles that address it generally, but not specifically. And so the best way to attack this was to address it head on, but also just like I actually thought it was interesting that when Councilwoman Rodbian brought up that they were going to address it with a civil violation. I think that is the best way to approach it, is to give us an educational component like we do in a lot of the public safety issues that we address from day to day, but also to, and so a first violation, maybe that is a way that an officer can go out and approach this, but also then from that aspect, go out and start at a low level and approach it from a civil violation and then move up from there.
Okay. Mr. Volkey.
I was just going to say the captain's killing it, so I'm going to let him keep answering. Like, he's got this.
Mr. Smith.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to say, what is, and maybe the sponsor can speak to this, and doing this so everyone can hear it as well, the context of dwelling in, so if I visit my family and I stop in town for one night, it's parked on a county road, has legal tags and everything else that's on the vehicle, is that considered living in the dwelling unit if it's overnight like that?
That's a great question. So if it's on a public roadway, so if there's an opportunity for you to park in, let's say, the driveway, that would not be considered a violation. But at the same time, that's also the situation where it allows the officer some latitude. And so in that case, would a warning be appropriate or make other accommodations in that situation? But again, gives us that opportunity to go out, educate the public about what it is. There's a transition phase and something like this, as was discussed in the previous bill that was introduced. But the idea behind this is to give officers an opportunity to see what's going on, to educate the public, and address this issue that was brought up by our constituents in the county.
Are there locations that are ideal for RVs to be located that we publicize?
So yes, that would be a component of this, and there are places in the county. I believe like Walmart is a location that allows for people to overnight, and obviously we have several campgrounds in the county, KOA, sort of centrally located in the county, and then also if you have a private residence that could accommodate water and electric, that would be a place that we would encourage people to park rather than on a public street.
And the last question is, what if no one's living in? What if it's just parked on the street?
If it's parked on the street, you're not in it, then
Yeah.
that would not be subject to a civil violation.
Okay. Interesting. All right, thank you.
Ms. Ledbetter?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious, I'm thinking about, I know some folks, my husband and I used to own an RV. And so we would, the night before we would leave on a street, we might have the RV parked on the neighborhood road so that we're moving things, you know, from the house into the RV, but you're not sleeping in it. Would that, there's room in the way this is written for that to be still allowed? I mean, I would hate for people to not be able to load their RV essentially and have that
100%.
interpreted as dwelling would probably be a bit much.
Right, no, 100%. And again, that's easily understandable, and again, part of that educational component. And officers are going to respond to those types of calls, understand what's going on. Bless you. Understand and get a feel for what's going on. And then probably if there's a call taker that's on the other end of that, officer's going to go back and explain to the call taker what's going on, or the person that called in, and explain what's going on.
Perfect. That's what I expected your answer to be. I just wanted to air it out. Thank you.
Ms. Rodvian?
Thank you. So my first question was, what exactly is the safety concern with sleeping overnight in an RV on the street?
So I wasn't on the bill originally when it was introduced, so can I turn that back over? Because I'm coming in on the tail end of this, but I'm perceiving that there was some issues raised.
Yeah, so I can tell you specifically from my district. I got outreach from a community. It's called Aspen Park. It's at the end of Mountain Road, just before the area where my district collides with Councilwoman Pickett's district. They had an incident where people were sleeping in an RV overnight on the public road, and the community was trying to say, you can't do that, right? That's not an acceptable thing to be out there. You don't have water and sewer. You know, this is a community that's pretty dense in terms of housing. Like, this is not South County. This is a much denser area. And so the safety concern is who's living in there, what are they doing in the RV, because you can't really see that, but you're on a public street. They're not hooked up to public water and sewer. You're potentially running electric from somebody else's property onto yours. So ultimately they're like, look, we just don't want this in our community. That is a problem. That's sort of bringing people into the community who are not subject to the HOA, who are not subject to any of the other rules. So it kind of gets to this global quality of life concern. I don't know if I would say it's safety in the sense of we think they're going to go out and commit crimes. Like, we're not saying that, but we're saying just overall, this is the type of thing that as a community, you want to be able to police on this, but on a public road in the community, they can't touch it. So that's where the police would have to come in, and this is the way to do it. That was the concern that was raised to me. That's what the impetus for the bill is.
Thank you. Could I ask a follow-up question?
Of course.
So this actually, I see Ms. Karpowitz is still in the audience. I don't know if this is just, I'm kind of curious because we really do have a housing and an affordable housing crisis in the county. I'm wondering if that's what's driving this. And that's not necessarily to, say flat out, I would oppose this legislation, but I'm just curious if this is really a symptom of, if this is a symptom of housing insecurity. And I'm sorry, I'm catching you off guard. You look like you're using your time wisely to work on something else. But do you have any knowledge, or maybe the officers at the table might have some idea too, if, if housing affordability is actually something that's a driver of, people kind of residing in RVs on public streets? I mean, if you're in the market to buy a home, I mean, my family has an RV and it's way cheaper than a single family home.
That's a really interesting question, and we can certainly take a look at that when we do our kind of point in time survey, when we survey the families and individuals experiencing homelessness, if that's something that we're seeing through our continuum of care process. I don't have any data on that, but we certainly know that, rent, purchasing houses, huge issue in the county. We're over 12,000 units short for people who are earning 60% of area median income, which is about, I want to say like around, I can't do the number off my head. I don't have my notebook, but I'll have it when I come up for the next panel.
That sounds good. Could I follow up one more? Sure. I think that's probably, I'm curious too, if as, officers, if you've seen any indication that this is maybe folks that are just, really stretched thin, looking for a safe place to be.
So I don't have the data on it right now, but I know that I'm sure you're very familiar with our crisis intervention team. They're
Yeah.
internationally recognized, and so those folks are out in our community on a daily basis. And so Jen Corbin and Steve Thomas, I know you're very familiar with
We all
them.
love them.
Yes.
I think I can say
as
that
do-
also.
As do we. I've worked with them for 25 years.
Yeah.
And they're wonderful, and they do go out and make community visits. The team in tandem with our officers and their counselors. So I can certainly follow up and try to find out if they've got
Even
data on that
anecdotally,
kind of
like if they
information.
can, if there's, find something like that out, that would be appreciated.
Absolutely.
I also I had no idea that Walmart allowed you to park an RV overnight. I think I may be rethinking my trips to visit in-laws in Alabama, because we could probably use the RV and just park in a Walmart lot. And they also have lots of electric car charging stations. That is the one place you can reliably get electric car charge. Sorry, didn't mean to be off tangent, but.
Yeah, don't quote me on that, but I believe that that's one of the places. I just know that when my parents used to travel, that was a place that they would visit, and there are some other places across the country that openly on their websites will let you safely stay on their lot, just because they obviously want to encourage it for their own reasons, but also just because it's a safe, well-lit place to stay.
That's great to hear. I did not know that. And it's encouraging that at least, if we were going to say, look, you can't have your RV on a public, you can't reside in your RV on a public street, that we have another, that people would have another option to say, look, this is the only place I have. It's either this or sleeping under the bridge, so that people would have a safe option of a place to go to if that is a driver, which I'm suspecting it might be, because I know that we have a housing crisis.
That would be our goal, is if we had something like this, our goal is always provide alternative options and, resources if we find something like that.
And I appreciate about our county police department. So thank you for doing that.
Ms. Ledbetter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To your question about safety, Ms. Rodvie, and before hearing Mr. Volke's answer, one of the things that I interpreted as being a safety issue when reading this bill was actually to the folks that might be occupying the RV on a public street overnight, because not all of our public streets, some of them have cars traveling constantly. If you think of you're sound asleep in your RV, and while you're sound asleep, a car crashes into you because you're on a public street, I think there's also a public safety issue there. That's where, before hearing his reasoning, was one of the things that I thought was the reason behind the bill. I think that is something for us to consider as well. It's how safe are the people? Is there good lighting? Is there safe sanitation situation? Are there busy cars? Is it a busy road? For the safety of the occupants as well.
I guess if this bill is likely to pass, I think one of the things that I think it would behoove the county and those responding to complaints to be prepared and knowledgeable about resources for housing security and safe places to park your RV, because clearly there's a reason someone is parked on a public street living in an RV. So hopefully we can wrap our arms around those folks and make sure that they're alternatives. I don't know exactly why. I know everybody's thinking about the Griswolds, Christmas, but this could be. We do have issues with both commercial vehicles and RVs on our roadways inhibiting sight, and we get a lot of complaints about that. But we've made decisions over the years about allowing work vehicles on public roads because people need their work vehicle to work, right? So people are obviously living in an RV because they need some place to live. So hopefully, if this bill is to pass, I hope Anne Arundel County will actually combine services with our homeless outreach and our other housing alternatives, and be respectful of the human beings that are living and have that quality of life as well, not just the folks that are comfortably housed and privileged enough to own a home. With no other questions, we'll move on to Bill. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Here. We'll move on to Bill 71-24. I believe that is Ms. Fiedler's bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this bill came out of a business in the 5th District that I actually used to frequent when my children were younger. And they've raised some concerns or shared some challenges that they're having with the existing pawnbrokers, secondhand dealer section of our code. So I'll share how the business model works and what they're facing as a challenge currently under the code. The current model for this particular business, and there's more than one located in Anne Arundel County, is that a parent or caregiver of children drops off a box. It has to be in a box. They will not accept bags or some kind of hard container of clothing to be sorted through or examined by a staff member. It takes roughly 30 minutes to an hour. They have high standards of quality of clothing that they will accept. And then that parent or caregiver gets an email or a text message, and it says, we are accepting 38 of your 62 items, and here is what we offer for your children's clothing. You can either accept or reject. You respond to that text, you go back, you get what they do not want to accept, and then you're given cash or a store credit for the amount that they are accepting. A lot of times when parents are participating in these transactions, it's when their children are ready to go into the next season of clothing. And we all know children's clothes can be very expensive. And they're trying to use some of the money from the trade-in, if you will, trade-in, to help fund the next season of clothing for their children. The current code says that there has to be a 30-day holding period for products that are bought and sold in this manner, and that anyone who is participating in the transaction must be 18 years or older, and there is a fee for each of those individuals who is able to participate. I think it's like $50 to be able to be a transactional employee. The establishment, just like every other business in the county, does have challenges filling their employment. So they do have a lot of employees who are under the age of 18, and under current code, they could not allow them to participate in the transaction process. So what this has done is it's really shifted people to go more transactionally, quick transactions to online marketplaces. And that is impacting businesses who are trying to service a community, mostly of parents who are looking for that quick turnaround to be able to invest in the next season for their children. I will say I have been talking to IMP. I do have an upcoming meeting with the police department to go over some of their concerns to see if we can find common ground to address those, but happy to answer any questions. And of course, the administration's here.
Mr. Hunt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ethan Hunt for the administration. I have Holly Velez here with me from Inspections and Permits, and Lori Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law. I'm going to turn it over to Holly in just a minute to just talk about a couple of the issues if you'd like. Unfortunately, the head of our pawn unit in the police department is out of town and couldn't be here today, but she did send me some issues that I know she shared with the council member as well last night. So,
Are you going to share those? Okay.
Yep. But
great, thank you.
Hello, Holly Velez from Inspections and Permits. So the concerns that we have with regards to the children's clothing stores, yes, they do purchase and buy and sell the clothing, but they also have other items. The police department shared with me some recent cases of shoplifting or thefts of children's clothing. So there is a demand for it. There's also been a rise in Lego thefts. I'm not sure if they do the toys themselves at that particular store that we're discussing, but we had thought of making, or I sent a suggestion, let me say, to Councilwoman Fiedler for an option. with the disposal of the property, as a licensed secondhand dealer, they are required to report by 10 a.m. the next day any of their purchases, which gives the police department a mechanism of connecting the dots from thefts back to sales. And a lot of times they can put a finger right on an exact person because they have to collect certain information when they buy, sell this clothing or whatever the item may be. We had made a suggestion that for the 30-day reporting period, maybe waive, with the exception of clothing, a secondhand dealer may not alter, transfer, or dispose of property for 30 days. That would give them the option of getting those clothes, seasonal clothing, right back out there for sale and not holding that up. We'd also like to make a change to the definition, but that's not pertinent in this situation right now. But that's kind of an overall view of the reasons for the license and how we're trying to work with Councilwoman Wheeler to get this amenable for all.
Did you want to follow up? We have no questions at this time.
Oh, I appreciate your willingness to work, and I look forward to figuring out a way forward. I think that there is common interest in finding a solution, so thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll move on, I think, to our final bill of the morning, Bill 7224. This is my bill and my colleague's bill, so we'll just get started. I believe the administration has a team to come forward as well. Bill 7224, the Housing Attainability Act. Each of you should have not only the bill, but a fact sheet. The sponsors are myself, Ms. Rodvian, Ms. Hummer, Mr. Smith, and the county executive has shown his support as well, which we appreciate. This has been a 9-month journey that has been incredibly collaborative and challenging, but I think we have defined persistence and perseverance and compromise and all those good things that go into making good policy. I want to take a moment, and I'll do it again at the first public hearing, to give my heartfelt thanks to not only those people at the table, but my colleagues and my legislative aide, Kristen Etzel, who kept us all on task for the last 9 months. Along with our private sector stakeholders that took time out of their billable hours to do this work together. It's been fun, right, everybody? It's been fun. Can we get there now that we have a bill in place? The Housing Attainability Act picks up where the Essential Worker Act left off last fall, and moves to bring a moderately priced dwelling unit MPDU inclusionary zoning policy to Anne Arundel County. This has been a goal of the administration and my colleagues to bring attainability and affordability to our county through multiple housing policies, and this is another tool in our toolbox, which I'm hoping will prove to not only bring moderately priced dwelling units, but will also break down some barriers and reimagine the way Anne Arundel County produces housing, which will hopefully tackle our housing shortage and address some of our aspects of affordability. It's such a big bill, it's hard to know where to start. This bill creates a MPDU program with a mandate of setting aside 10% homeownership units and 15% rental units of all new developments in the county. Many of the tenets of Bill 7824 remain intact in this bill. One of the things that you'll notice is different is when we get to a recalibration of some of our bulk regs and our set-asides and lot sizes and things were carefully curated through the last 8 and 9 months in each of our zoning districts to make sure we can get beyond that sort of 75% maximum allowable density and move more towards using land that we currently have in a more efficient way while maintaining the integrity of our environmental protections and our critical areas and things like that. We really want to drive housing into places where it is most welcome and needed. So I can go through some of the differences so we can talk a little bit about some of the things of how we got here with looking at, like I said, lot sizes and bulk regulations, but also making it allowable to apply your gross density onto your net developable envelope. Very similar to how we currently cluster when we talk about cluster development, which is an excellent tool, especially in preserving our sensitive areas and environmental features on our parcels across the country. But also, it allows us to bring in a diversity of dwelling type, which is a lot for us to contemplate in the code and is very challenging. And you'll hear about missing middle and this across, it's sort of a household word these days, but we did have to contemplate how those dwelling types would fit in each of our residential districts and address affordability. Many of you know that we have a senior tsunami, as they call it, coming through our demographics. Lots of seniors, lots of baby boomers retiring, as well as young professionals coming up behind them, and figuring out a way to make sure our code meets the market demand for housing attainability, and the housing market is as important as bringing in the affordability in my mind. So this bill attempts to do that. I'm happy to stop talking and see if the administration, this was a true collaborative effort, and I can't emphasize that enough. It was a lot of work. It's probably not perfect, and there's probably some things we need to think about moving forward. There's certainly more we need to do in this space, but I'm extremely proud of the work that's been done, and I hope we get it over the finish line with a unanimous support of this council. Mr. Hunt, would you like to?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ethan Hunt for the administration. With me at the table, I have several members of the administration who have spent countless hours over the last 8 months working collaboratively to get this bill to a place where we think it's the best bill possible to put forward, building, as the chair said, on what was in 7823 and incorporating some additional components to allow for increased flexibility to meet housing needs in Anne Arundel County. So I do have Jansen Evelyn, our Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for Land Use, Jenny Dempsey, the Director of our Office of Planning and Zoning, Lynn Miller from the Office of Planning and Zoning, Aaron Karpowitz from Arundel Community Development Services, and Lori Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law, who put in tremendous amount of time and effort drafting this bill and really getting down in the weeds. So I really appreciate all that she's done on it, and I'll turn it over to Jansen if he wants to make any additional comments.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the council. I'm not going to go into a lot of talking points now with respect to the bill, but I definitely want to echo Madam Chair's sentiment with respects to this was truly a collaborative process. When you look at when you're creating good policy, and you often hear people talk about the sausage making that occurs during the legislative process. This was truly that. And everyone that took part in this bill, from the council side, from the administration side, from the private sector, as well as the comments that we received from the advocacy branch, or the branch advocacy side, they all wanted to ensure that we not just maintain the integrity of what 7823 stood for, but that we also got to a point where we could ensure that this was manageable for the private side, but also to ensure that we were receiving more units to be delivered to the people who this bill was originally created for, to create workforce housing. So if there are any questions, of course, myself, members of the administration, as well as the chair, we're here to take any questions.
Ms. Fiedler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I previously introduced and passed a very small cluster development bill that updated the definition of a cluster development. When I was working on that bill and the predecessor to that bill that was much larger that I withdrew, my constituents in District 5 really wanted to address the bulk regs for cluster development and increasing some of the buffer. I did note that it looks like, unless I'm reading this wrong, the cluster development setbacks are adjusted by 10 feet, from 50 feet to 40 feet from a residential adjacent lot in most of the residential districts. I just want to make sure I'm understanding that is correct.
That is correct.
Okay, and the benefit to that being?
Additional housing.
Okay, thank you.
I don't mean to be flip, but we have a lot of calculations that take place on a project, and a 10-foot setback is not going to move mountains on producing additional housing, but you combine that with other setbacks and the way we can be flexible, and someone who is designing a quality community with diverse housing options, they're going to have that flexibility to use the land as efficiently as possible. And the goal is to reach that maximum allowable density of a parcel. That is what we carefully took. We didn't make a wholesale change and bring it down to 25 or 20 or 10 feet. We made very conscious decisions when we were looking at all of these calculations, and we compromised a lot, right, Ms. Miller? And I feel like this is a very carefully curated attempt to address housing, the housing attainability in the county. It just is. We have a lot of work to do in that space, and breaking down the barriers in the code. The code is currently set to, we talk about, you hear all the time, they're building all those McMansions over there. Well, that's what our code allows currently in certain areas. That's all the code allows. It dictates the code, and all these bulk regs and setbacks and things, they're meant to. They're meant to maintain a large lot, single-family home, which now in Anne Arundel County is way above $1 million in most areas, and that's not attainable for the vast majority of our citizens here. So we took, at sometimes painful details, and had to really use all of our mental energy to carefully address how we're going to increase our housing supply, while also creating mandating that the private sector bring forward below market units. So it's a very big balancing act. So yeah, we decreased that buffer by 10 feet.
Thank you.
And there's probably lots of other little tweaks if you really drill down in it. There's a lot of other little tweaks, and hopefully it's all to get a house or a unit for our children to move into, so they don't all live in our basements.
And if I also may follow up, some of the changes that you do see in the chart, maybe at 10 feet or something like that, they were in pretty close concert with our members of the stakeholder group that convened for the last 8-9 months of the private sector, that helped us, have that conversation about, well, this will really help us maximize what we can get on a particular piece of property, so on and so forth. So just to kind of give you a little bit more of an answer.
Madam Chair, may I?
Sure.
Completely appreciate that. There is a long history in District 5, particularly in the Severna Park area. I'd be more than happy to sit down with you and talk about those, just to give you an idea of where I'm coming from whenever I look at that. I do appreciate you confirming it's 10 feet, but I just, I'm always cognizant of that when I look at legislation. So thank you.
We definitely know each of us has communities that have been built in our district that maybe weren't as well done as we would have liked. But since those days, those good old days of Anne Arundel County, the county code and regulations, both environmental and others, have truly changed tremendously to accommodate the quality of life in each of these districts. And now we need to add on to ensure that same quality of life and character of community in especially our lower residential areas, while also thinking about attainable price points for our citizens. You cannot open a newspaper or listen to the radio or hit a bookstore without this is such a huge issue facing our country and our county. So I'm extremely proud of this work, but I know, and I think the people at the table know, and some of my colleagues know, that it's only one tool in the toolbox. But I do think the work is truly reimagining the way we'll produce housing. And I think over time, as we know, our national builders across the country are beginning to get more creative with design, and I'm super excited about that. So we're not looking at, this also allows for a little less cookie cutter standardization across housing and communities, and bringing in mixed income and mixed design. I hope our architects in the community are all paying attention. Maybe there'll be maybe it'll be a jobs program for architects, so we can have a little more interesting housing coming forward to accommodate our seniors, our empty nesters, our young professionals, and young families that are currently not in the housing market. No questions, huh? None? Not a one? I agree. And I think we'll get a 7-0 vote on October 7th. I'm not sure I have worked harder on any other piece of legislation that I have been engaged in, and I really can't. Somehow I'm not getting emotional this morning. It's probably that traffic that I was in, but it really has been a labor of love, and I'm excited about it. I'm pleased that we were able to get to this point. And I'm hoping that my colleagues will also appreciate the hard work and vote aye on the 7th. So if there aren't any questions, we'll close up for the morning. I think that was the last thing on our agenda. Is there any other item any council member would like to discuss at this time? Okay. Yep. Let's do that. That was. I didn't turn the page of my. We do have resolutions, and they are administration's resolutions for our SACs. My apologies. Do we want to take these as all three? Go ahead and discuss 3424, 3524, and 3624. These are the Stakeholder Advisory Committee appointments for regions 5, 6, and 8, our last three regions. Well, that deserves a celebration in itself. Mr. Hunt, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ethan Hunt for the administration. With me at the table, I have Christine Duval from the Office of Planning and Zoning, Jenny Dempsey from the Office of Planning and Zoning, and Lori Blair Klossmeyer from the Office of Law. So as you know, the county code lays out requirements for the general development plan, requires it to be broken up into regions, at least 7, and also requires each of those regions have a stakeholder advisory committee, which is between 9 and 15 citizens who are residents or own property in or have an interest in land use and planning in that area, who are nominated by the county executive and approved by resolution of the council. So these are those nominees. Let's see. Resolution 3424 is for Region 5. Resolution 3524 is for Region 6. Resolution 3624 is for Region 8. I'm happy to read through all the names if you would like. I know that the spreadsheets of the nominees were shared with all council members ahead of time, as well as opportunity for council members to nominate their own nominees to the regions.
Do council members have any questions about these 3 SACs? Ms. Fiedler?
I don't have any questions, and I'll probably state this again at our meeting, but it was very hard to make a decision. I think we were emailing late after deadline, and I said, I've got 3, now I've got 2. Oh, it's really hard, and then 2 hours later, I'm like, okay, finally, and I'm going to do a backup. So I think we have been so lucky to be in a great position to have really qualified candidates willing to volunteer their time on this important legislation.
I will make one note. Just remembered, there will be an amendment coming at the meeting for the Region 8. One of their nominees is moving to Virginia and so has had to withdraw, so we will have to replace them.
All right. Well, thank you. I don't see any other questions. Any other items any council member would like to discuss at this time? May I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
The motion carries. The county council is adjourned until Monday, September 16th, 2024 at 7 p.m. Thank you, everybody.